We are fortunate to have Brian Kelly, the State Secretary of Transportation here. With Brian, we get to talk about all kinds of serious issues like toll facilities and hot lanes and PEPRA 13C, some of you know what that is, and of course funding for our various projects. I'm especially pleased to welcome him here to Southern California, the home of the first place Dodgers and the first place LA Angels. So it's good to have Brian here where we have two first place Los Angeles teams. Why are you not cheering? I don't understand. So with that, Mr. Kelly, oh, there he is out there. Now, isn't that just like the Irish? Brian and I both have Irish names, and that allows us to make jokes about Irish. Secretary, welcome, sir.
Thank you, Art. Good to see you. The great Art Leahy, ladies and gentlemen. The great Art Leahy. I haven't told this story broadly because I want to keep Art out of jail, but no, kidding. We were recently in Spain, though, and Art gave a great geographical lesson to the folks who live over there about LA, Orange County, and how one is actually the subset of another. He used to say it was Orange County is the hierarchical father of LA, but he's turned that a bit now, and the Spanish didn't understand a word he was saying, but I was cracking up. Well, thank you for allowing me to be here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about what we're doing at the state level for transportation in California. I'm going to make some brief comments, much of it working off of words that I shared with this group last year when I was able to speak at this conference. In that sense, I'm kind of like, it reminds me of a flight I was on recently, flying from San Francisco to Boston. And Art, I just want to say for the record, while I'm a California kid and always have been, maybe I only call myself a kid, but well, I lived my whole life in California. I'm actually a Boston Red Sox fan. My father's from New England, and while they're having a rough year this year, I am still going to remind you that they are the reigning world champs, so take that. Anyway, I was flying from San Francisco to Boston, and anybody who goes on a cross-country trip, you know that when you're flying through the heartland of America and you look out the window of the airplane, things look the same, state after state after state. All you see is square agricultural land. And so as we were on that trip, and we were in about our second or third hour over the Great Plains of the country, the captain came on and said, ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain so-and-so. I just want to remind you that we are indeed making progress. And so, so I'm here to tell you that we are indeed making progress. But I want to talk about how we're doing that and really work off of some of the things that I said last year that were important to us. When I spoke last year, we had just, I think, released or we're about to release a vision document on transportation in California. And we tried to express a vision where we had certain pillars that we thought were important for a transportation system in this state. And it relied on things like preservation, a commitment to preserve the assets that we have. Innovation, we got to continue to keep California as a national leader in innovating. And this is particularly important in our transportation sector. Integration, the importance of the partnerships in transportation between the state of California, the federal government, and our local agencies, I think as most of the people in this room know, on an annual basis, we spend between $27 and $28 billion on transportation in California. About half that money is generated at the local level, and the feds and the state government provide the other half. That's an important statistic, an important number for a couple of reasons. One, it's very different than most states in the union. Many states are reverse. A lot of dependency on state and federal money, less at the local level. Here, it's different, which means we have a very decentralized system, and it really places a premium on partnerships and healthy partnerships. So integrating our systems and our partnership is a big part of the pillars that we talked about last year. Reform, the necessity to make sure that our state agencies and departments for transportation, overseeing transportation policy, were modern and moving with the times. And I've said in other forums, I've spoke to many of you, formally and informally, about the need for developing a transportation system in California that's not just doing what it's done in the past, which has built a very impressive and important state highway system and really taking care of the safety and reliability of that system, but also building a transportation system that will help us meet our sustainability objectives in California as well. There's no state in which I think that's more important. Obviously, we work here under a set of laws that were passed in the last 5 to 10 years that really don't give us much of a choice in that area. It says, transportation in California is going to be part of the answer on our air quality and our sustainability challenges. And that's an important element. So partnering for all of that and reforming our departments and our agencies to make sure that we're moving in that vein and toward those objectives is important. And then, of course, the fifth pillar that I mentioned last year was funding. And this remains a challenge, although I'm going to outline some ways we've made some progress in the last couple of budget cycles on that. But preservation, innovation, integration, reform, and funding. And I'm going to work off of those pillars from last year to sort of comment to you all that we are indeed making progress in those areas, just like the captain of the flight said. So one on preservation. Caltrans has been working on, and we're going to expedite the effort this year to adopt an asset management plan that's really going to focus on the condition of our assets, where they are now and where we want them to be, and develop a strong strategy toward getting there. We talk a lot about how much our needs are in the transportation sector, and based on one assessment or another, it's hundreds of billions of dollars. What I think is important is getting a sense of where you are and where you want to be, say, in the next decade, and then aligning revenues and coming up with a funding package to meet those objectives. I prefer that approach to an approach that just says, hey, this assessment says that number, let's chase a number. I don't think that's the way to do this. I think it's much better to get a sense of the condition of our assets, again, where we are, where we want to be, the important investments we need to make to get there, and then put that plan together. And again, there's areas where we're making progress on that, and we have a ways to go. One of the things we did recently toward that objective of preservation of our system was in the last budget, we repaid 6 years early a loan from the transportation accounts to the general fund, and we dedicated all of that revenue to improving the rehabilitation, the operations of our transportation system. And that was a $351 million down payment, but it does show our increased focus on preservation and taking care of our system. And I want to add something that Caltrans has done that I think is particularly impressive. Caltrans took recent federal largesse that we received in the transportation world, some ARRA funds, and really dedicated toward improving our pavement on the state highway system. And the results are impressive. Between 2011 and 2013, the percentage of lanes in California in good condition improved from 75% to 84%. Prior to this effort, we were something like 48th in the country, and we bumped up. Now, we have to take steps, and we've got to put a funding plan together to continue in that vein. But it does show when you put a focus on preservation, asset management, taking care of what we have, you can make great strides. And the department did that with the availability of federal funds, and I was impressed with those numbers that were released in the 2013 pavement report. Innovation, we continue to want to innovate in transportation. It's an important part of California's culture, important part of what we do. A couple of things quickly that we're doing in that regard. At the Department of Motor Vehicles, we were tasked by statute a couple of years ago to move forward on regulations on what's called autonomous vehicles or driverless vehicles. We've got companies in Silicon Valley and we've got automobile manufacturers who are moving along on that technology, and there's a great promise for what that could mean for Californians in the future. On a personal note, I have a father who is 78 years old and was recently told by his doctor he can no longer drive. It's a very difficult conversation for families to have, but our demographics in California show more and more families will be having similar conversations with an aging population. The potential for autonomous vehicles to move people who otherwise have mobility challenges is great. And that's a reason that the Department of Motor Vehicles is moving forward quickly on regulations to allow testing of that technology and ultimately operations of that technology. Integration was the third pillar, and I want to report some progress we're making in that area, mostly as a result of the budget that was just passed by the legislature and signed this year that included SB 862, which was legislation that called for the expenditure of cap-and-trade funds in the transportation sector. There's a lot of controversy around cap-and-trade, I understand that, but the objective that we had heading into it at the beginning of the year, and we talked about this at this very conference last year, was to assure if a cap-and-trade program was going to come together, that a good percentage of those dollars were going to transportation. And I'm happy to be here today and report that 60% of the funds going forward are going to the transportation sector under the plan adopted by the legislature and signed by the governor. This includes investments in moving forward with high-speed rail, transit capital programs for our commuter and urban rail partners, LA Metro, BART, Metrolink, Amtrak, on and on. We have 5% of the funds going to transit operations by formula directly to transit operators, and 15% will be made available through the Strategic Growth Council for sustainable community strategies and affordable housing. So again, pleased that we're making some progress on that front. I want to also mention under the category of integration, and again, in my speech last year, I talked about how we can partner with regions who are really ahead of the state on moving forward on multimodal transportation plans. It's the regions who have said, look, we're not just going to invest in highways alone anymore. We got to invest in communities. We got to invest in bike and pedestrian facilities, public transit. We got to invest more in taking care of our local streets and roads. Those plans came up, and the challenge for the state is how do we rightly partner with those objectives. Those are important objectives for the state as well as they are for regions. One thing we put together out of the gate to try to be a good partner on that was the Active Transportation Program. You know, we looked at transportation funding and we saw that funding available for bike and pedestrian facilities was small, very uncoordinated. We had something like 4 or 5 different accounts, all with relatively small amount of dollars, administered by different bureaucracies. And we undertook an effort to consolidate that program, to put more federal money in the program. And just last month, I see Andre Boutros here and Lucy Dunn from the CTC. California Transportation Commission put out the first wave of those funds to projects all around the state. You know, is this a top-down effort from the state going down? No. This is the stuff that you all asked for, that regions asked for, and just to put a capper on it. That program, I'm proud to say, put out something like $216 million for bike and pedestrian facilities over the next couple of years. But the demand was great. The demand was over $1 billion in projects. So there's no question that California and building communities is looking for that kind of investment. We did a great thing, I think, in putting the ATP program together. I know in November, the locals will do their part on the regional share of those funds. But it was a great step forward. And for this region, it was wildly successful. I think the last numbers I saw, out of 148 projects statewide, 82 were in the Southern California region, and a good number of those here in Orange County and Los Angeles. So it's a successful first step, and I look forward to that growing as we move forward. Quickly, I'm running out of time here, but I want to touch on the 2 other issues. One, of course, is reform, which is something we talked a lot about last year. It really began with the governor's effort with his governor's reorganization plan, where for the first time in California, we established a cabinet-level position focused entirely on transportation with the establishment of the State Transportation Agency. That was actually a recommendation from an old review that was 20 years old saying, hey, this is something the state ought to do, but it had never been done. And with the governor's reorganization plan, we finally did that. And our agency is charged with coordinating the programs and policies from our different transportation departments to get a singular set of transportation objectives that we can achieve in the coming years. And so that was a big deal. A bigger deal since then, of course, was work I've done with Caltrans Director Malcolm Doherty on really trying to improve Caltrans as an organization. as a partner for all of you who are doing work in your communities, and as an agency with a modern mission, vision, and goal agenda that is right for California's times. And Malcolm and I have taken that very seriously. We're spending a lot of staff time and resources. We have updated Caltrans's mission, vision, and goals. We have created work groups through the agency and the department, working with external parties now to focus on some of the 47 recommendations that the assessment of the department that we called for last year provided on how we can improve the department. And so that work continues, and that's work that some of you will be participating in as those work groups go forward. So reform we're making progress on. And finally, and probably the biggest challenge, of course, is funding. Yes, we need a long-term funding source for transportation in California to meet our demands. But I'm pleased that we've started down the road of doing some of those things, particularly in the last budget. I was just giving a speech before I came here to the California Chamber of Commerce. And we talked about the condition of the state economy. And it was a good report in that it showed that the economy in California is on the comeback. I mean, there's no question about it. We heard from analysts from the banking community and others who have showed that, you know, any measure you want, job growth, GDP, pick your measure. The economy is coming back. And that means so much to us in transportation and policymakers in Sacramento, because we're coming out of what I call the dark period in Sacramento, where we spent 3 years disinvesting in the state. But it was something you had to do. It was very difficult decisions to balance our budget and get our fiscal house in order. But now our fiscal house is in order, our economy is coming back, and there's an opportunity to reinvest in our infrastructure and in programs to expand our economy. And the governor has laid out the first marker on that by saying, look, if we develop this cap and trade program through the auction process, we will make those dollars available for infrastructure improvements going forward, not just for state projects, but for local and regional projects as well. And these will be projects that can meet not just, again, our mobility needs, but also our sustainability needs and objectives. As I mentioned, we repaid in the budget a transportation loan early, and we put those dollars to work on preserving the state highway system. And we're moving forward on trying to develop, through a work group that I've put together called CTIP, a more sound and uniform pricing policy for California. The idea that we can use tolling or pricing on managed lanes, express lanes, whatever you want to call them, to both raise revenue, to operate and maintain our system, but also to manage congestion and improve the performance of our system. We think there's more to do there. We're working with a broad group of stakeholders to develop that program, and recommendations will be coming forward later this month. It's also time to look outside of our traditional funding sources. You know, the gas tax has always been the go-to place to invest in transportation in California. But for the first time in my 20 years doing transportation policy, the projections of gas tax revenue in this state are on the decline. Cleaner vehicles, the fact that inflation erodes the excise tax, those two things are combining to show, if you look 30 years out, we're going to get less and less revenue from that source. So we're also looking at exploring other options, including fairly controversial options like the road user charge or the mileage-based user fee, whatever folks want to call it. The idea that maybe we should look at whether or not we can charge directly on usage, and, you know, is that something that could be both viable for those who pay the tax, and we can reinvest those dollars in transportation, and maybe even it becomes a replacement for the gas tax. We are interested in studying that possibility, and so we're moving forward in that direction. And then, of course, we've got the long-term funding opportunities that we have to try to develop. This is really a place to find revenue to invest in the highway system and our streets and roads. Cap and trade money really can't be used for that, so we've got to look for another source. Again, the work group we put together is putting together the program to do that, and we're going to start digging, lifting up our sleeves and digging into that issue with more intensity as we get into this fall, and hope to come forward with some recommendations as we go forward. So, again, we've flung over the plains and we're making progress. And I appreciate your time, and I look forward to working with all of you in the days ahead. So thank you very much for allowing me to be here today.